Hey guys, welcome back to another Architecture Real Talk. So today we're going to be looking at a topic: what is the difference between architecture and engineering? What are the key differences when it comes to their role in the profession? And there's a lot of misconception about what an architect truly does. And in this video, we're going to do a deep dive and examine all those differences. So the first thing I want to look at is the internet's perspective on what an architect and an engineer differences are. One of the key things that I've noticed is an engineer perception is that pretty much there's problem solving. They're the science, math portion of the field, and they solve problems. And on the other end, architects' main job is to be creative, expressive, and they're primarily responsible for design. And pretty much it is worded in a way, and this is my perception of it, that it's not a necessity. And I want to clear that confusion that architects are problem solving. We're looking at maybe code restrictions. We might be looking at egress requirements. We might be looking at fire lanes. We might be looking at traffic. We might be looking at building height restriction, program requirements. We might be looking at client constraints. And there's various different facets of our field. Even when it comes to like speaking with engineer, give you an example, a structural engineer might be working alongside an architect to figure out a structure, not that it works, but it has an expressive statement that goes alongside the context of the city. So all of those various notions are design problems that need to be solved by the architect. A building looks good if an architect puts a lot of thought into it. Engineers pretty much solve the problem. And I'm not vouching for one or the other. I'm saying both of them are necessary. And let's examine them. So one of the things that I want to look at is the education. So the education standards for engineers is very, very straightforward. One of the things that they're trying to build is a high understanding of science and math and those type of fields that requires an engineer to go through and solve a mechanical layout or an electrical layout or an HVAC layout, all of these various different types of layouts, structural calculations, and they're pretty much solving the building to make it function. And when it comes to an architectural education, we're talking beyond basics, is his majority of his endeavors are creative endeavors. All of this is to exploit the next innovative idea, is to push the boundaries of architecture to a new light, to create a new statement. It is to analyze the context and to formulate a concept by which you can deliver a project. All of which that I've been talking about in my previous videos when it comes to what architecture truly is, what it means to be a master builder. Right? And that's when it comes to an education standpoint. When it comes to a work relationship, an architect in general oversees all of consultant works. Majority of the time, an architect is a standalone firm or it coincides with some of the consultancy, but majority of the burden or liability resides with the architect when it comes to project coordination and project management. So if we were to look at it, the client will come to an architect for a building project, and then it's architect's job to deliver that project. That's all what client sees. When it comes to the architect, it is his job to divvy up the liabilities, and let's say he doesn't want to be responsible for structural or doesn't have a structural stamp or a license, and we'll talk about those too, and then he'll give that responsibility to a structural engineer. Rightfully so. And he would give it to a mechanical engineer, electrical or plumbing engineer. And these are pretty much one of the main trades alongside with civil and landscape engineers that architects work with primarily. So when it comes to who gets paid, that's a different topic. But when it comes to an architect's job, he's divvying it up what the piece of the pies are and giving it out to the proper consultancy. He's also responsible for coming up with a contract that has a relationship between the client and is also responsible for a relationship between the consultant and the architect. And is also responsible for a contractor relationship with the architect, alongside how those three components of client, contractor, and architect comes together. So that's a triangle by itself. And then imagine if you have consultants building off a side branch into the architecture. So this is what our field as far as work is concerned looks like. When it comes to pay, despite the fact that we get the whole pie in front of us first, we're getting 6% of construction costs, we're getting 7%, 10% of construction costs as our fee, we have to allocate those fees to those particular engineer. My experience is that engineers have far more stability than an architect. Architects are the first to be hit, and we are pretty much the last one to recover. Engineers can pretty much diversify with different architectural firm, and they can end up getting work from different architectural firm to run their practice. When architects work, they have a primary niche that they work inside of. For example, an architect might just be looking at neighborhoods. They might be looking at just doing multifamily, might be looking at just concrete high-rises, might be looking at just doing schools, right? So every one of architectural firms have their own niches, unless they're like Gensler or HOK, which they do everything. But when it comes to primarily all of local architects, they have particular niches that they favor. And within those, they have several different consultants that the work go out to. And these consultants, like structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, civil, take in work from various different architects. So you have a lot more flexibility with the engineer. I feel like there's a lot more stability, and there's a better work-life balance when it comes to engineer. What I mean by that is they're working 9 to 5. 9 times out of 10, if you call an engineer after 5 o'clock, it's going straight to voicemail. When it comes to an architect, he's responsible for realizing the project and the deadlines. So you're going to find an architect sitting in the office till 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, trying to deliver the project. But that is also the passion that drives us, because at the end of the day, it's our name, it's our firm that we represent, right? If you have your own firm, then this is your project, this is your baby that you're realizing. So the name comes with a lot more responsibility. If I was to give you a project rundown of how the pay works, when it comes to pay, engineers usually start with a higher salary. We're looking at probably having an average of around $60,000 to $80,000 is what an engineer works at an entry level. You might have civil engineers start a little bit lower, around 56 or 60,000 as well, but they will slowly climb up to a medium wage of around $80,000. Architects starts as interns until they have acquired their license, and they will eventually get to a project manager level despite the fact that they're not licensed. But that takes around 8 or 10 years before they become a PM, and that's when they're looking at salaries comparable around $75,000, $80,000. But architects usually start with a much lower salary, around $50,000 to $60,000. I know there's some firms out there that will exploit that and go even as low as $48,000 or $50,000, but you will slowly come up and switch firm every 2-3 years, and you will be able to come up to a $60,000 to $70,000 range around 5 or 3 years into any company. And then you will eventually gain enough experience where you're around 9 or 10 years into the actual profession, and your pay will be comparable to that of an engineer. When it comes to education, architects have a lot longer journey. We're looking at a lot longer terms when it comes to licensure as well. We have around 5 to 6 exams depending on what ARE you're on. Around ARE 5.0, you have about 6 exams that you need to take, along with accumulating a certain number of hours. I know that engineers have 2 exams instead. And despite the fact you get licensed or not, it doesn't hinder your growth when it comes to an engineer. An engineer is pretty much prized for him being an engineer. unless he want to go out and stamp drawings and want to be liable for being an engineer based on his own stamp, he doesn't really need to acquire a P. When it comes to layout of a project, an architect is very heavily involved at the beginning phase of the projects. Much through schematic design and design development, you will have an architect start coordinating with civil and landscape first to understand the site. And as the project proceeds to about permit drawings, there's about a 50-50 involvement with construction when it comes to consultants and architecture. And as it goes towards construction, engineers are more heavily involved because they're realizing or solving the design that's already been provided by the architect. A great way for a person to look at architecture and engineer relationship is that architects are creating the problems for engineers to solve. So how do we create the problem? It could be a simple basic problem, a repeat problem, right? You have recycled the design, or it could be an innovative, a completely mind-boggling problem for the engineer, and that's entirely up to which architect it is, right? It is up to architectural expression. Regardless, you pay the engineer about the same fee. So if you are an architect, why not exploit your design innovation and push the design further? As I said, that there's more stability in the engineering field. You will realize that you also have about the same number of avenues when it comes to going into different profession. There are specialization within engineers that are such as when it comes to mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, civil, landscaping, and just as counterintuitive or just as their counterpart in architecture, you have the similar design components to it. You have graphic design, you have interior design, you have city planning, urban planning, also known as landscape design. You have architects, for example. And so you have a counterpart to an engineering field that is involved in design. Hopefully this clears up the confusion between what architecture and engineer are synonymous terms. They're not. It clears up this air of what an architect truly is and what an engineer truly is. I want you to understand that they're both necessary to realize a project. They just are different facets of the same whole, and which is an entire firm and how the things operate. With that said, continue to create and inspire.
Follow for more content.